Good morning. It is February 7th, Senate Judiciary. We will be hearing from a number of folks about access to civil justice. And at the top of the agenda, we have Justice Carroll, of the Vermont Supreme Court.
Good morning. I'm a bit under the weather, so I apologize in advance if I have a coughing fit, but let's hope that doesn't happen. Thank you, Senator Hashim and members of your committee for giving us this opportunity to present to you. I'm the chair of the Vermont Access to Justice Coalition, which was created by order of the Vermont Supreme Court. Our coalition consists of entities which provide legal services to those who cannot afford to pay for them. While these entities each have established several programs to provide legal services to indigent Vermonters, the need continues to grow. You may have seen the fall 2019 study entitled Economic Impacts of Civil Legal Assistance Programs in Vermont, which was commissioned by the Vermont Bar Foundation and funded by the Vermont Supreme Court. This study concluded that legal service groups provide direct benefits to their clients through greater access to the legal system to defend their rights and to make meritorious claims, and they provide indirect benefits to all Vermonters in the form of substantial economic return to the larger economy. Importantly, the study concluded that for every dollar invested in Vermont low-income legal services, the state and Vermonters see a rate of return of $11. As a trial judge for 17 years, I witnessed on a daily basis that individuals without legal assistance are at a serious disadvantage. Judges may assist these individuals only to a point by answering questions for them, but not suggesting strategies or arguments and the like. These litigants are facing life-changing issues, including eviction, small claims cases, and serious matters such as being a party to a relief from abuse or stalking case. While the legal services community in Vermont has tried to address this problem, more needs to be done, and this includes funding for our organizations so that they may continue to provide the existing legal services to Vermonters, but also to fund new programs for self-represented litigants. Today, you'll be hearing from Sam Abel Palmer, who is the Executive Director of Legal Services Vermont, and Yasmin Dwidar, Executive Director of Vermont Legal Aid. Hannah King, I can't really see everybody there, but Hannah King should be there, who's the Executive Director of Vermont Bar Foundation and is available to answer any questions. And Bob Paolini, Executive Director of the Vermont Bar Foundation, who you all know at this point, I'm sure will wrap up. Thank you so much again for giving us this time.
Thank you. Hope you feel better soon.
Thank you.
So we can go next to Sam Abel Palmer.
Good morning, everybody. Well, thank you, Brad. Just really appreciate the opportunity to speak to everybody. So, as Justice Carroll mentioned, I'm Sam Abel Palmer, Executive Director of Legal Services Vermont. We are the grantee for the statewide of Vermont for the Federal Legal Services Corporation. We are a separate agency from Vermont Legal Aid, but we partner with them very closely and we coordinate our services together. I do need to preface one thing, just because of Legal Services Corporation regulations. We do have some pretty strict lobbying restrictions, and in most cases, I'm not allowed to lobby, but I am allowed to do two very specific things. One is we are allowed to ask for money from my agency. That's not my specific purpose here today. But what I can do very broadly to any member of the legislature is to provide information about what's going on, what we're seeing in the field, the kinds of needs that we're seeing, what we're doing to try to address them, where those gaps are. And that's really my purpose here today, is to give you that information, and particularly to talk about a report that we finished in December of 2024 to look at the statewide legal needs among low-income vermonters. This is something that we're mandated to do by our federal grantors. But we have to do this every 5 years. We looked in 2019, and we did a new study in 2024. And of course, the world changed radically in that time, especially through the pandemic. But what we did was to gather really as much data as we could. The hard data of what's on the ground, what are we seeing, what types of cases are coming in the door, where are the needs being met, and most importantly, where are the needs not being met. If you had a chance to take a look, you see that the kinds of things that we primarily drew on. We looked at court data. We looked at people calling 211. We went out and had listening sessions and talked to people around the state. We looked at the one of the most interesting areas was we had to run a very comprehensive statewide legal assistance website. What pages were people going to? I mean, the data there is actually very revealing, because that site gets an enormous amount of traffic. It gets, on average, about over 600,000 pages a year. It's huge. People are going to it all the time, and it's really it's very revealing to see where do people go. But I think the most critical data is the helpline data. We run a statewide helpline. We have an 800 number, and people call us, and it's my agency that they're generally calling. There are a few other avenues into the system, but primarily they're calling in, they're putting in online requests for help, and it's that aggregate data, whether we can help people or not. For every call that comes in, we record what's the legal issue and what are people trying to get assistance with to the degree we can. And so that, to my mind, that's the real pulse of what's happening out on the streets, because that's where, when people are asking for assistance. So we looked at the data in 2024, and we looked at especially 2 years of the aggregate data from the previous 2 years, and then we did the same thing in 2019. And the results were really striking. The first thing that we noticed, just by looking at the data, is the demand for assistance is up sharply. When we started the helpline, there was basically a group of 4 of us, and we were able to answer live calls, talk to people directly, and really just about answer every call that came in the door very quickly. I now have, we can't do that anymore. We can't answer live calls. There's just no way to do that. We're getting 100 to 120 requests for help a day, every working day. And so we have people leave messages, and then we call them back as quickly as we can. I have one full-time person whose only job is to read those incoming messages. And they're getting transcribed. It's very efficient, but it takes one full-time person just to read those calls. Overall, the total number of requests, if you look 2017, 2018, and 22, 23, aggregate up at least 20%. And we certainly saw a spike at the beginning of the pandemic, but it never went down. That those numbers just have stayed steady, and that those requests for help have been coming in more and more and more. And the other most striking part of it is what people are calling us about. People call us about really the full range of civil legal needs. And that's across housing, benefits, consumer issues, family law, education, any number of all kinds of things that we deal with. The biggest spike by far percentage-wise was in people calling about housing cases. And most specifically evictions. The total aggregate, the numbers are right here, but probably as a percentage, saw at least a 25% increase in housing calls on top of the overall, that's on top of the overall call, increasing call volume.
Senator Bosin.
Yeah.
Um, are you able to provide legal support to those evictions cases or?
Some. We certainly have we've focused a lot of our resources that we had otherwise had in past years on other areas. We've been diverting those primarily to housing because that has been the area of greatest need. We and our partners at Vermont Legal Aid kind of divide up the state as to who's covering which counties, and that's been a little bit shifting. You know, we're really grateful for the funding that the state provided for the pilot program in Lamoille and Windsor counties, where we're trying to get more assistance in those areas, and that's wonderful. We have some funding that supports us bringing in volunteer attorneys in a number of these counties. So we do that in Chittenden, Franklin, Rutland, Washington, and Madison counties. So we're able to catch a lot of those, but in a lot of cases, it's not full rep. We'll go and we can certainly try to give advice to people on the phone, and sometimes that's just one-off advice. Sometimes it's just coaching them through, here's how you write an answer to the case that's filed. A lot of it is before the case ever gets filed. When somebody first gets that notice to quit, just telling them this is the process, because people don't necessarily understand the process and what are your rights and are you, we're in private, we're advising people, is this a sustainable situation or not? Are you going to be able to afford the rent? If not, we can't keep this going forever. So it's a real mix of things.
As a follow-up to that, do you have any data on the length of time an eviction case takes when a litigant is pro se versus represented?
Right. Yes. That's not in this particular study, but I'm happy to provide. We did this back when we were first piloting that program for the pro bonos, which was before the pandemic. We had actually a couple of grants from Legal Services Corporation where we did this primarily. We were doing, again, most of the counties that I had mentioned, we were doing it. We had started it under Judge Tor in Chittenden County, and then we brought it down to Rutland and a few other places. But because this was a grant funded thing, they wanted to know, is this working? So we commissioned the Center for Rural Studies at the University of Vermont to come in and do a statistical study about how these cases were going. And at the time what we did was we looked at over a 4-year period in Rutland, and we compared it to, I believe it was Windsor County, which at the time did not have any kind of supports like that. And we were primarily looking at, are we helping our clients? Or what are the outcomes of the cases? Are we preventing evictions? But one of the things we looked at was the time from filing of the case to closing of the case. And in fact, pretty strikingly, the length of time to resolve the cases went down pretty dramatically when there was representation on both sides. It's more efficient for the courts. It's more efficient for both parties. Typically, when we have somebody in there, so we target people at the rent escrow stage. So these are primarily non-payment evictions. And we go to the courts. We have people there on site, and we're able to provide assistance kind of in the moment. And in a lot of cases, we will resolve those cases that day, which saves the court's money, it saves our client's money, it saves the landlord's money, because they're not paying their lawyers for another month or 2 or 3 as the case drags on. So it really turned out to be a win-win situation. And so we've been keeping that program going, and we've found it to be very effective.
Thank you. You notice that in other civil cases as well, that representation is not obviously better for the person because the system is complex, but also speeds it up and makes it more efficient. It
can. It's a little trickier just because the way the evictions work, there's a pretty systemic way of doing things. Other cases, and we're not all of our cases are in court cases. But certainly if somebody is doing a social security appeal, it so helps them to have somebody telling them how the process goes. When people are being sued for consumer debt and the person, their only income is social security, they don't have they don't own any property. The creditors is never going to be able to collect on them. So we're often able to get those, get the creditors to realize they're wasting their time pursuing this, and they will often drop it if the person is completely judgment proof essentially. So yeah, so it definitely can facilitate the system in a lot of ways. Where we really have, our biggest totally unmet gap, and we do a lot, we've been diverting a lot of our resources to evictions. The area we have just not been able to touch. We used to do some more. We used to do at least advice in this situation. We cannot touch family cases unless there's domestic violence involved. If there's domestic violence, we have resources, we have funding, we can get help people. But if it's a regular divorce, we used to, when we had the helpline, we used to talk to people and people would call us every couple of weeks and kind of coach them through things. We just don't have the resources to do that at this point. It's at this point we are, for most family cases, we're trying again. We're always looking for new ways. We've been piloting kind of once every quarter or once every couple of months, just a phone or video clinic. Well, we have a handful. We have probably about 8 or 10 wonderful family attorney volunteers who will be able to talk to somebody for maybe 45 minutes and apply for another grant, see if we can expand that some more. But otherwise, we're just sending them a text saying, try the Vermont Bar Association lawyer referral service, but that's about all we can offer right now. And that's frustrating because those are complicated cases, they're contentious, they go on forever, and people need to talk to somebody. Really not being able to assist with that. Yeah, and I think so. As I say, I think the thing that is, the most telling about this is just, kind of how, using, the resources we have, and again, the support we've gotten from the state has been fantastic. We have a bigger staff than we had before the pandemic. I was about 11 people beforehand. We're at 18 now. Legal Aid is the larger organization, and they've been able to, use some of that extra funding to expand staff. But that's really been keeping just our noses above the water. If that, there's just those needs are just enormous, and as I say, with evictions, especially there's a particular stat that I looked at over that 5-year period. All the housing calls 5 years ago, they were split a little bit evenly. You had, I think it was about 20% were non-payment evictions. About 10% were either for cause or no cause evictions. And then the rest was a mix of mostly landlord tenant disputes, like just all kinds of other things that people like call security deposits, the whole range of stuff. So before it was, I guess it was about 18, so maybe about 30% were eviction calls. That's up about 45%, close to 50% of all the calls coming in now are related to eviction. And the number of non-payment loans is about the same. That's stayed at 18 to 20%. It's the for cause and no causes that have really jumped up. That's what people are calling us about. And, and I totally understand, the economic pressures that are on our clients are also on the landlords. This is a really destabilized housing market. The costs are astronomically high. There's no affordable housing, very, very little. and it's full. It used to, 5 years ago, we could typically resolve a case very easily if somebody couldn't pay their rent by finding them another place that they could afford. It's really hard now. And the consequence of that is just striking homelessness, and which also puts enormous pressures on the system. And I'm sure you're familiar with the consequences there. Yeah, I mean, so, and there certainly are plenty of other things that we're seeing. We, our partners from all legal aid in the Office of the Healthcare Advocate work on the healthcare issues, but those also are always very far in the forefront of issues. And, then there are plenty of things that we don't deal with at all, where, we're restricted on what we can do around unlawful immigrants, but Jill may be able to talk to you later about some of the stuff that, the needs around that area. There are all kinds of pockets of things that, we again used to be able to give some casual advice about, and we just can't, because we're putting all our resources on the housing cases, and that's where it's at least 50% of the work that we do. It's that's what we're saying. Happy to answer any other questions.
Thank you. Sarah Boss.
Good morning.
Right.
I was curious when it comes specifically to non-payment of rent.
Yeah.
As to when someone reaches out for you, is it, we all realize there's the notice for someone's a complaint.
Yep.
And then after judicial review, possibly the writ of possession issue.
Mhm.
At what point in time do you find yourself coming in at a higher time when you first serve them with a letter of eviction, or after it's had judicial review? Do you have the opportunity to look at it and say, well,
we try to talk to people as early in the process as possible. And ideally, if possible, to avoid it ever getting into court in the first place. If we can talk to people at that notice quit stage, that's the ideal situation from our point of view, because if it's a situation where, we can kind of winnow out in those contexts, is this really an unsustainable thing where you're just never going to have the money to pay the rent? Or did you have a family crisis? Did you have, a blip in your income stream? Are you waiting for a job that's going to start in 2 months? Can we figure out a way to bridge that gap? And if we can have that conversation early on, we can, at least try to steer situation to avoid the court costs, try to resolve it. Tell, either we or we can talk to the tenant about how you can reach out to the landlord to try to resolve it. All of those things. So we definitely try to do that as much as possible. Kind of depends on people calling us at that stage. Some people, quite a few people do, but not everybody. We have been able to work out. So that's at that point. When the cases get filed, we do get, we've been able to work with the judiciary. So we get a notice that that's happening. And both we and our partners at Vermont Legal Aid, at that point, we send a letter out to everybody against whom an eviction's been filed, saying, hey, if you would like some advice here, we can always talk to you. And that does help us to again, kind of capture more of those folks so that we can try to, again, where are we? What's that much decisions.
We lose. Oh,
You're gonna have to repeat that all over.
Sarah, please speak.
So I hear you saying that the sort of biggest increase in evictions are no cause and just cause evictions. How do you provide legal support to someone in a no cause eviction?
And they're really nice. They're not much. I mean, you can tell them about the reality of the situation and say that, look, eventually you are going to have to leave because there really isn't a legal defense to a no cause. And it gets complicated because we get a lot of cases where there's both either a non-payment and a no cause or a for cause and a no cause that are noticed together, but with different termination dates because of the statute that, you know, how much time you have to give somebody in those cases. Which, you know, it just, we often have to kind of coach people and say, here's what this all means. Because that can be very complicated.
Yeah, but so the legal reality in a no cause is that someone is going to lose their home and there really isn't due process.
Well, I mean, there's due process to the extent that it will go through the court, but the judges really don't have discretion to deny it. Unless the only way that you can do that is if it was a faulty fine. If the notice didn't give the full time allotted in a no cause, but otherwise, once you're at the end of that point, yeah, there's not a lot of recourse.
Thank you. Do you have any further
And
testimony?
those are the main things, but I'm happy to come back in and if other things come up. But I also want to make sure that my colleagues have some time to talk to you as well.
Great. Well, thank you. Appreciate it. Next up, we have Hannah. Okay.
I'm happy to answer any specific questions about the foundation, but if you want to focus our time on letting the organization speak to you. Oh, am I next? I'm going out of order.
That works.
Okay. Good morning, Nate Dudar, Executive Director, Vermont Legal Aid. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. I think Sam covered a lot. Sam is the Executive Director for Legal Services Vermont, and we do a lot of work together. On the Vermont Legal Aid end, we tend to be heavier on the litigation side. But what I can say to that is that increasingly over time, we've had to limit our ability to legally support folks. So it's increasingly becoming more legal advice as opposed to litigation, which having someone by your side through the litigation process is critical. And we're kind of in a place in this moment where we're trying to figure out how to stretch every single dollar that we get. I know I came last year to talk about the legal needs of Vermont Legal Aid, and we kind of talked about the difficulties around funding. And the majority of our funding comes from the state, and a good portion comes from the BVF. Unfortunately, year over year, what ends up happening is that there isn't an increase to fund. Over time, sometimes there are changes to law, changes to policy. Sometimes those changes can be harmful to Vermonters, or they could be beneficial. And our sources of funding are sometimes limited to particular areas. BVF funding is what allows us to do, for instance, something like impact litigation, which can help us serve a wider number of people as opposed to on an individual basis. It also allows us to provide clinics in various areas of law, including in high needs areas. So, for instance, when Sam and I were going to different communities, particularly underserved communities, to speak with folks, they had various needs in various areas. And the South is particularly a place where we wanted to focus our work. Unfortunately, and I think the legal needs assessment talks about this, there are legal deserts within the state of Vermont. And the South is definitely one of them. Where I live, the Northeast Kingdom is one of them. One of the ways that we try to extend our legal services to be able to have an impact on the community is to hold legal clinics. Unfortunately, because we have limited funding, we've had to kind of limit our resources. But we are without VBF funding, we wouldn't be able to do some of the clinics that we're trying to do. But our ability to provide clinics is limited because funding is limited. Were there to be increased funding through the Vermont Bar Foundation, we can do more clinics. I know that Brattleboro has requested legal clinics. Bennington has requested legal clinics. We're in the phase of trying to figure out a plan towards having legal clinics in those areas, in various areas of law. And so an increase to VBF funding would obviously help us expand access to legal services through that. One of the big areas that I think Grace Hasden, who headed our homeowner legal assistance project, talked about last year was consumer rights. We haven't had funding around that area, but the BVF has supported us when it comes to consumer rights work, but because the pot of money is so small, we're only able to try to provide services, but in a very, very limited way, which is unfortunate given that in the civil docket, the consumer cases are taking up about 26%. And to your point about pro se litigants, I know Sam talked about this, but as someone who has worked as both a litigator and worked on the bench, those pro se cases are grueling. They take hours upon hours of time. Something that could have been completed in 10 to 20, maybe even 30 minutes can sometimes take 2 to 3 hours, which is obviously inefficient for our court system. And to your point about, the level of service that people get in the housing realm, we've had to have conversations internally about what we're going to need to cut in order to be able to reach people. So for instance, the RIP fees, we actually get people that try to ask for legal assistance in that realm. And while it's an uphill battle, we can try to give them help. However, we're trying to assess with what limited funding we have, where do we invest our resources? And so we've had to make the decision, well, maybe we can't really touch these cases. We're going to have to focus on cases that are earlier, that we may have a greater chance of having success in. But it doesn't mean that we can't help in the written cases. We can. It's just that year after year, as the needs increase, we have to figure out, well, what are we cutting? What services are we limiting? And so we are very much in favor of increasing funding to the Vermont Bar Foundation, which I think makes it possible for all of our legal services organizations to do our work, and particularly in times where federal funding is being threatened, and where we used to have pandemic funding. Those are coming to an end, which naturally means that we're not going to have the funding to do the work. Our staff has already been shrinking in addition to that. And so increasing funding to the VBF is essential for us because it allows us to do a lot of the work that a more restrictive funding doesn't allow us to do. So very much in favor. It allows us to do really important work, sometimes around time sensitive matters that our funding doesn't necessarily cover. But also happy to answer any questions if I could be helpful. But I think Sam covered a lot.
Sorry if you had mentioned this already, but immigration, have you recently started seeing an increase in requests for that to Vermont Legal Aid or to any other adjacent organizations?
So I think Sam's team does a lot of intake, so he would be able to speak to the immigration.
I mean, yes, absolutely. I mean, the calls are coming in, but we basically have to attempt to divert them either to the Vermont Asylum Assistance Project or the clinic at Vermont Law School, both of which are absolutely at full capacity and have virtually no ability to add in, really take on new cases. And we send them that way, but we don't have a lot of hope that they're getting a lot of assistance, or they're going to have to wait a long time before they can.
We are aware of the increased need. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Jill Martin Diaz. I'm the executive director of Vermont Asylum Assistance Project. So I am here. Yeah, I know I was missed in the initial introduction, but I am here with hopes of testifying to speak directly to that question. So I can speak to our caseload and our intake volume.
Thank you.
But we are aware of the increased need, and to the extent that we don't do immigration work, we've tried to apply for other sources of funding to do that. That hasn't happened, but on a very limited basis. I mean, I talked about clinics. through the BBF funding, we've been able to organize, particular legal trainings and or responses to increasing community needs. But obviously it's limited. But BBF funding is critical to being responsive to unique issues like that fall out, would generally fall outside the scope of our work.
Senator Hosty, do you have your hand up? Senator Norris?
So
Okay, well, thank you for your testimony.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Next up, we have Bob. Or Jill, did you want to? Okay.
Yes, I'm a member of the Vermont Access to Justice Coalition. I'm sorry again that I wasn't announced to the committee, but thank you so much, Chairperson and Senators. I'm Jill Martin Diaz. My pronouns are they, them. I am Executive Director at Vermont Asylum Assistance Project. And what that means in practice is that I am the state's only licensed supervising immigration attorney. Historically, immigration is not a piece of legal services work that has been delivered by colleague organizations, and the law school clinic, their primary focus is maintaining a low volume of cases that are good for student learning to support student clinicians at the law school to begin the experience of direct service practice. And born of this unmet need, what national partners in colleagues in the National Immigration Bar called a legal service desert here in Vermont for many years. Co-founders of my organization got together and stood up our organization first under fiscal sponsorship and as an incorporated nonprofit about 1 year ago. So it's been a year that I've been in this role. And in that time, we've been able to mobilize national resources and grow our staff to a team of 4. So our staff are providing direct services. We're also supervising volunteer attorneys from across the state to deliver direct services. And then I'm also trying to balance my time so that I can be meeting the moment, providing community education and advocacy and resource generation for national partners around the country. Just to give you a picture of where we're at as a state of immigrants, the immigrant population in Vermont is estimated to be around 30,000 people. And by that, I mean foreign-born people. So people who may or may not have citizenship or other forms of status. Any foreign-born person in Vermont falls under VAP's constituency and may encounter politicized experiences that jeopardize their immigration status. Immigration status and the pursuit of immigration status is the necessary precursor to work authorization. So what you're hearing from me right now is that there are 30,000 Vermonters right now who are afraid of losing their ability to work, their ability to pay taxes, to pay for their needs, to pay for their rent as a result of anti-immigrant legislative changes and policy changes at the federal level. This is a problem for Vermont's economy. Vermont needs more people. The Working Futures Project, I think it's called, just issued an economic action plan for 2025. And the report cites as its among its top 3 strategies for preserving a prosperous future for Vermont, addressing our demographic crisis, is in-migration. The interesting thing is, even at a time when in-migration is at an all-time threat, there are thousands of Vermonters already here, already participating in our economy. They are 80% more likely to start a new business. They're contributing millions of dollars to taxes, to Medicaid, to Social Security. And all of those folks, their ability to continue being members of our community, of our regulated society and economy, are currently under threat. Historically, the state of Vermont has never funded immigration legal services. That continues to be true. There was one-time federal funding that was passed through the state refugee office following the Russian invasion of Ukraine and following the fall of Kabul. And some programs like mine were able to stand up new legal services with support from that federal funding that is all expiring in June of this year. At my program, we're 50% federal funded. None of that funding is renewable. I have 4 attorneys with active caseloads representing not just unauthorized immigrants, people with lawful permanent residence, people who are parents of US citizen children attending Vermont schools. And those are the folks right now who are calling our phones off the hook. And as a direct service practitioner with no administrative support or fundraising support or comm support, I'm taking time away from their access to me right now by taking time out to come join you for this testimony. So I appreciate the opportunity. Before I open it up to questions, I'll just close with a recent phone call I got to help illustrate how connected immigration is with all of the other poverty legal issues in Vermont. I got a call from a Chittenden County school teacher. I live in Chittenden County. People know me in the community. I got a call from a school teacher during the school day. They were calling me along with an aide and some other liaison workers at the school to let me know that they have 2 children in their class whose parent was detained by ICE that morning. The person works for a Vermont business in one of Vermont's prominent economies, which is the case for many of our most prominent economies, including agriculture and hospitality. That teacher didn't know what to do with their children. The custodial parent who is not detained does not work, is not authorized to work, hasn't been able to make it through our exponentially growing request for intake list, our wait list, and so is not on a path to work authorization at this moment. The family lives in employer-provided housing, as is the case for many unauthorized workers supporting Vermont's economy. They are hearing murmurings from their co-tenants that the co-tenants would like to see them illegally evicted as a matter of emergency to avoid attracting other immigration enforcement activities to the employer-provided housing. And we understand that the employer is also afraid of adverse repercussions to immigration enforcement activity, either at the workplace or in the housing, and also is considering effectuating an illegal eviction. Now the family is at risk of DCF custody. Kids of parents who are being taken into ICE custody are subject to DCF custody, and without adequate legal services to plan in advance for that eventuality, those kids are going to be coming into the system without a way to leave until they age out. This is a problem with such overwhelming economic proportions. It's going to touch every other area of poverty lawyering, and it's going to affect even on a structural level. If my staff, if we can't replace the funding, that's more people, a lot of staff in our sector who are going to be needing unemployment compensation from the state of Vermont. There's ripple effects that are going to be felt, that are already being felt. People are self-isolating. They're sheltering in place like it's April 2020, not going to school, not going to preschool, not going to work, not going out and shopping. So I also want to join my colleagues in echoing support for increased state resources to the Vermont Bar Foundation. They're a funding partner of mine. It's, to be frank, it's a very appreciated but relatively small proportion of our budget has been supported by the foundation. And I know that that's not for lack of need and interest, but just due to resource constraints. And so we're really hopeful that the state can help us meet this moment and continue to provide life-saving legal services that are going to be pivotal to Vermont's economic future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions?
I just have a quick question. Thanks for being here. When you say that 50% of funding is federally funded, can you give me some idea what that consists of?
Totally. So most of it is through the Office of Refugee Resettlement. The Office of Refugee Resettlement is being specifically targeted for, the agency is being dismantled and all the funding is being cut. And we also serve the populations that are under threat by express policies, censorship policies. And many of us, in order to do the roles well, bring heritage language skills and are ourselves in our bodies people that are being targeted by the government. So there's this added impact on my staff right now of trying to tolerate the uncertainty at this moment. We're either directly funded, through an umbrella organization through Office of Refugee Resettlement grants to support community and economic and social integration for non-citizens who come through a refugee resettlement process, or folks who have come to the US to apply for asylum, as is their legal right under the Immigration and Nationality Act. And so we're funded there, or there is Office of Refugee Funding, Refugee Resettlement Funding that was passed through the state refugee office. And that is another source of federal money that comes our way.
So, thank you for that explanation. Well, when we're talking about sources or resources, what is the bottom line figure that I'm looking for here, approximately, through the federal?
The bottom line figure to sustain our current staffing of 4 attorneys, I'm the licensed supervising attorney and I have 3 law graduates working with us. The amount of money that I need to replace over the next 18 months is in the ballpark of $200,000. I'm not, we're already looking to diversify sources from the private sector, from foundations. There's a lot of national resources, including through the Immigrant Justice Corps Fellowship, that Vermont has never been able to capitalize until my position was created. Now that there's a supervising attorney in the state, IJC as a partner has been throwing increasing money at us. We're hosting Vermont's first 2 attorney fellows, and we're welcoming our 3rd in September. So we're bringing in more resources by virtue of being here. But I see opportunity. I do feel hopeful. I feel hopeful in the rule of law, and I feel hopeful in my ability to sustain the program during this time. But it is no joke, the figure that I'm looking at right now.
Just wanted to clarify this for my own understanding. The 50% of the federal funds that you get, were you saying that what's at risk is $200,000 over 18 months?
Yeah, and I can get the exact calculation. I would rather not. I don't have that number specifically right now. So if the committee would welcome that, I'd be happy to follow up. But we have funding that was one-time funding through politicized issues like Ukraine and Afghanistan. That funding was always set to expire, and that was seed money that the board of my organization used to stand up my position. But now there's an additional Office of Refugee Resettlement money that we rely on an ongoing basis that we fully expect to be cut.
Joe, can I just want to add one statistic. So something that we saw on our side, we were able, because of the specifics of the Afghan refugee situation, we were able to waive some of the LSC rules and we had a handful of volunteers who were helping people just with the applications for asylum, not for any legal contest. It was just doing the initial applications, and amazing volunteers, but they were putting in minimally 25 hours per case, up to 50 just to file the application, let alone any subsequent legal challenges. These are really time-consuming, resource-consuming issues. Just to do an assignment, just to do a challenge to a deportation is massive amounts of time and energy to do for one person.
Yeah, something that maybe Jill, you can answer, because Jill was actually instrumental. ELA was trying to start an immigration practice through the Immigrant Justice Corps, but we couldn't because we didn't have anyone with enough immigration experience, and we didn't have the funding to have that person. I think IJC is limited to maybe like 2 fellows per organ. No, they can do more. So I guess I'm wondering out loud whether, increased funding to BBF and around immigration work could support having someone in place who can supervise the work and then turn to organizations. I don't think there are a lot, but this is one of them that could potentially add attorneys through fellowships.
Certainly. Thank you, both of you. Those are absolutely both true. And bear out with our experience. The investment in my position has been able to bring in 3 new legal service providing positions with support of national funding. And the Immigrant Justice Corps has been very happy with the partnership in Vermont. They're particularly concerned about Vermont because of our location in the Swanton sector, which is a politicized, very busy northern border crossing zone. Most of our state is in the 100-mile border zone jurisdiction of immigration enforcement. So we expect a disproportionate amount of enforcement activity and attention here, even though our population is so small overall. And the Immigrant Justice Corps has just partnered with me to apply for private funding to stand up 3 additional positions in partnership with that beginning next year. So there's a lot of interest in seeing our rural, our legal services desert survive this moment. The final piece, there's another kind of hidden cost, since Yasmin and Sam so helpfully brought that up. A final hidden cost that I'll just put on folks' radar. There is a very noted lack of legal expertise in the executive branch. Well, actually, across the 3 branches. I'm getting contacted by government workers from all 3 branches, as well as subcontracted service providers, nonprofits, all kinds of private entities for my immigration legal expertise. So I am not only serving as this supervisor with my 1 attorney license of all these direct legal services, I am also being tapped very regularly, like Treasurer Mike Pichak tapped me yesterday to present to a sold out webinar of 1,000 Vermonters asking about 4th Amendment rights to privacy in quasi public spaces like this one. These privacy rights are not just for immigrants, right? They're for everyone. We're all very concerned about our constitutional rights and maintaining those values here in Vermont. And I've been really privileged to have had an education that makes me available to the community in this way, but it is absolutely competing for my attention and my ability to competently serve non-citizen Vermonters.
Thank you. Committee, anything else? Okay. All right, let's, thank you for your testimony. Let's take about 7 minutes or so for a break, and then we can come back for a big revenue. Does that work? Thank you. Well, I'm sorry. I thought you were.
I'll be quick.
Okay. Does 10 work for you?
Sure.
Okay.